I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Hey guys, today we have something really special to share, which is an interview with April from the YouTube channel Coolirpa. And she's also the author of a brand new book called DIY Thrift Flip. So we're going to talk a little bit about her book, and we're also going to talk about doing thrift flips, upcycling, and all the creativity inherent in that process. It's a really fun conversation, so I hope you enjoy. Hi, April. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. It's so good to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to talk today. So you have a new book called DIY Thrift Flip, and it's just so much fun. So you want to talk a little bit about what inspired you to create this book?
Yes, so my book just launched. Here it is. Pretty much it's everything that I've been doing on my YouTube channel for the past 12 years. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted something outside of creating videos for people to watch and something physical for people to have at home. Just something all in one book for people to reference.
Yeah, there's something nice about having a physical book that you can turn to over and over again. It's like a good reminder to have in your sewing space too, for a place to turn for ideas that's a little bit different.
I have a ton of books in my sewing space too, and I always have it on display. And, you know, whenever I need inspiration, then I can reference it. So that's kind of what I wanted this book to be, just something where people can, you know, always go back to reference. There's sewing tips in it, alteration basics, and then the rest of the book is like inspirational projects. So if you ever, you know, have a creative block, then you can refer to it and get some ideas.
Yeah, that's really cool. You're really known for upcycling. So what appeals to you about upcycling? Like, why did you get into it? What's the big draw for you?
So for me, I got into it in high school, which was like over 14 years ago now. Mm-hmm. So it was like my sophomore year of high school. And then I would start off with like t-shirt reconstructions. And I really liked upcycling because one, I didn't have any money to buy my own clothes as a high school student. So it was a way to save money and just repurpose what I had at home and just create a unique wardrobe that would stand out from everyone else's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I felt the same way. That's kind of why I got into sewing when I was in high school, is that kind of the same as you. I didn't have a lot of money, and I also wanted to express myself. It's such a time of people like exploring their identity and figuring out who they are. You know, is that kind of what motivated you?
Yes. At the time, there weren't that many sewing YouTubers out there, but I did watch like people that posted like t-shirt reconstructions. So whenever I would get free t-shirts from school, then I would just like copy those tutorials. And it was just a fun way to already, you know, make something more unique and fit my style.
Yeah. So when did you start your own YouTube channel?
I started at the end of high school. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't anything, you know, like back then YouTube was just a place where people uploaded, you know, for fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't intentionally post to, you know, gain a following. I just posted because it was something I was passionate about. I also loved like making home videos already, editing videos. So it kind of just all worked together. And once I learned how to sew and upcycle, then I decided, I've seen like a couple channels on YouTube do it, but there wasn't many. And I wanted to just have a place where I can share my own ideas as well.
Yeah.
So I started end of high school. And then once I became more consistent with it after high school, then that's when I took it more seriously.
And how has the channel evolved since then? Because you've been doing it now for, you said 12 years. So how has it changed?
Yeah, it's brought me so many wonderful opportunities, really. And I learned a lot from being a YouTuber and starting from there. With Upcycle, initially for me, it was about just finding my own style and saving money. standing out, things like that. But my YouTube channel and my viewers that watch really, opened my eyes to sustainability, fast fashion, just being less wasteful. And then that's kind of how it evolved, in my opinion. In the beginning, I didn't really focus too much about how I can be less wasteful and things like that. Like with anything, like all crafts, there's going to be waste involved, and especially in sewing, we have a ton of scraps that we just cut away. Or if you're not intentional with where you are placing your pattern, you're just cutting in the middle of the fabric, then you're wasting like a ton of fabric. And I learned along the way to be more mindful about those things. And I think throughout the years, that kind of changed my perspective as well with how I want to approach my videos and what kind of DIYs I want to do. Like, I don't really want to be so wasteful. I don't want to just cut something up, and throw out the scraps, I need to be strategic. Like, how can I use all of the fabric or as much fabric as I can? So I think that's where I'm at now.
Yeah, well, that's really cool because it shows how interacting with a community around sewing, and in your case on YouTube, can really change your perspective on what you're doing. I think that's really cool. And it's so interesting, all the things that people are doing now with low waste or zero waste sewing. I feel like that's much bigger than it was, 10 or 15 years ago.
Yes, definitely. And I will say it has changed how I approach my upcycling. Because like I said before, I would just thrift for anything, just for like, let's say there's like a special detail at the top of a dress. And then I would only want to use that part, Yeah. So I kind of had to change how I think. Like, I can't just make decisions like that, like how can I design something that can incorporate it better? Or do I even want to cut it up at all if I'm only using that top section? So I think because I changed, my values and just I became more educated on that as well. And just I don't want to be wasteful, then it affected like my videos. I'm like, I want to do it. I want to give people what they're asking for. But at the same time, it just goes against what I believe now, and I don't really want to just whip out a ton of things and just be wasteful. So I think that's where it became conflicting towards the end. And I did take a break from it, or I am currently still on like a break from that until I do find like a good balance,
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. How do you feel like your audience has responded? Do you talk explicitly about waste, and how do you feel like your audience has responded to that?
No, I don't talk about waste. My tutorials have always just been straight to the point, and that's how I like my videos to be. You're getting what the title says, like this is what it's about. And I think until I get to a point where I am more educated, I feel like I'm always learning still.
Right.
And I need to get to a point where I know what I'm talking about and feel confident in speaking about it before I can preach it to people as well.
Yeah.
So I've done like a few zero waste projects, but at the same time, I don't want the focus to be on zero waste because that's just not possible for us to be zero waste. Just to be alive is to be wasteful, but it's about being more mindful about that waste, So even when I post zero waste tutorials, I feel conflicted because then I don't want people to have this perception that like, oh, she's zero waste, that everything I do in my life has to be zero waste. That's not it at all. It's about how can we approach sewing and anything else we do with that mentality, just the thought in our back of our head, like just don't toss it away or save it or try to use the most from it.
Yeah. It's kind of like harm reduction. Like, I feel like that's, that applies to a lot of different aspects of life. You're always going to have some kind of an impact. So how can you reduce the amount of harm that you do in everything you do? Yeah. And I feel the same as you. I'm very interested in low waste or zero waste sewing, but it's not something that I also feel educated enough to really expound on, but we try to talk about what other people are doing and the interesting projects that are out there that other people are doing. But it is something that I definitely feel like I could also use more education on. So.
Me too. I'm still learning. I wish I want to get to a point where I can passionately, preach to people, but I'm still learning. And, for now, I can only inspire people through the fun content, inspire people to upcycle and go thrifting, shop secondhand, just reuse things from your own wardrobe. So that's all I could do for now, is just to get people on board first. And then from there, maybe they will be inspired like me to continue learning more.
Yeah. One thing I really liked about your book, I have your book here, is it just has a sense of fun and that things don't have to be perfect. And do you feel like that's part of kind of your philosophy?
Yes, that's how I fell in love with sewing in the first place. Because back in high school, it was so much fun. My sewing teacher, so I took a sewing class in high school, and my sewing teacher was just, so free-spirited. She would just let me create whatever I wanted to. She would let me just take fabric home. And in class, she would let me work on my own projects because I became more advanced than other people, just learning the basics of sewing. So I would go home and I just would continue learning about it. So she knew that I was already more advanced. So she would just let me just whip out anything I wanted to. And it was a lot of fun. And it was different because when I graduated high school and I went to pursue more sewing in college, it no longer became fun for me because the teachers and the classes were very strict because it is college. So they were a lot stricter. Everything was by the books. Like you had to do it properly, or this is how you do it. And they would care about it, looking correct. And that kind of took away the fun for me. And I realized that if it's like that for people who are trying to learn, then they might not want to, continue learning.
Yeah.
So I like to always approach things in a way where it's like, oh, you don't have to do it correctly, just try it out for now, because I was not doing anything correct back in high school, but I was more fearless, with my designing. I was just willing to try things out, and it was fun. And I learned through that process and the mistakes I made. But once I learned how to properly do things, I don't know, it just felt like it put me in a box, like, oh, I have to do it the right way. And it no longer became fun for me. And I feel like only now I'm back to having fun after like 10 years. I'm back to where I was. We're back to where we started, where we're having fun, just being creative and exploring and not taking it too seriously.
That's so interesting. I feel like I've definitely gone through those cycles too. I'm sure a lot of people listening can probably relate to it also, where you kind of start out in that beginner mindset of there's so many possibilities and everything seems like just so fun and it's fun to experiment. And then you get trapped in wanting things to be a certain way and wanting things to be perfect or to get to a certain point. And then you kind of lose your spark sometimes.
Yes. It's hard because with a platform as well, you have a lot of eyes on you, a lot of voices, a lot of opinions. So whenever I did get a comment where it was like, oh, I would have done it like this, or next time try this and do that. And it started making me feel like very self-aware about everything that I did in my tutorials, when that shouldn't have been the case. Like this is my way of doing it and you have your way. And if it is wrong, I'll look into it, or maybe I'll learn something new, because I have learned a lot from, my comments. But ultimately I wish I knew that back then, because I wouldn't have become burnt out with all of the voices like coming at me and feeling like I had to please everybody with the right way of doing something, when there really is no right way. Like, yeah, there are ways, but my mentality is that if it does work, and you made it for yourself, it looks good, then no one's gonna know, and I don't, yeah, that's just how I feel.
Yeah. I think I've seen people get very hung up on certain things, like making something that fits perfectly and it can't have any wrinkles in it. And people can get very, in my opinion, a little bit like obsessed with things being perfect in that way. And
yes,
maybe they enjoy that and that's okay for some people, but I do feel like it does provoke anxiety in others. And I don't know. I think your hobby should be fun. It should be something that brings joy to your life. Yeah. So do you still do a lot of... I
agree.
Do you still do a lot of thrift flips? Like, what are your favorite kinds of things to upcycle and change up?
Yes, I definitely do thrift flips still. I've been focused a lot on like cosplays, and just for my thrift flips, they're not like crazy thrift flips anymore. I will every once in a while focus on those, but like I said, my beliefs have just changed a lot because throughout the years, I would thrift flip so many gowns. I would do like garments every week.
Yeah.
Like that was for like 10 years, like make a new item like every single week. And all of those clothes started to pile up. And I'm like, what am I going to do with all this stuff? Like it's all made to fit me and I don't even wear it so often. So my approach now is like, I focus more on alterations, like how can I make something look more flattering on me? So I like to show those quick fix because I feel like that's more relatable and helpful to people at home too. Because most people are not going to be transforming entire outfits, Eventually they might, if you're passionate about it enough or, you have something to wear it to, you'll do it. But the day-to-day is about simple alterations. How can I hem this dress? How can I taper in the side seams? How can I make the sleeves looser, the sleeves shorter? Just things like that. And I've been having fun teaching people the basics because I feel like that is a more useful skill to focus on. And then if that inspires you to do more, then you can learn more from there. So I've been throwing more simple alterations and then I'll still do my thrift flips. And then because I'm really into cosplay right now, then my thrift flips are more focused on like characters from shows that I enjoy. But I won't just make it super costumey as well so that I can't wear it ever again. I'll take those characters' outfits and show people how to thrift flip it, transform it so that it is wearable. It's something cute that you saw a character wear. And how can I recreate that from my own wardrobe or go thrift for an item and make it wearable for my own style?
Yeah, that's really cool. What you were saying about altering your clothing and making that kind of content for people, I think that's really interesting because it does help people to be less wasteful. Because I think a lot of times, especially for those of us who sew and make clothing, you end up with things that are maybe not quite perfect, or there's just something that's a little bit off, and for clothing you buy too. And being able to alter them to make them wearable for you is another way of reducing waste, really.
Yes, because if you learn how to mend and change your own clothes at home, then you're not continuing to buy new clothes just to add on to. Because if even thrifting becomes wasteful at times, because if we're always just thrifting, then like I said, those clothes have to go somewhere. So you bring it home, you either got to donate your clothes, and at least that is circular fashion. But if you can figure out how to just change the clothes you have at home as well into something you like, then that's even better. The most sustainable item of clothing is the one that you already own, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And there's also this question of how much you really need. You're mentioning that, you just kept, bigger and bigger piles of clothing from making all these thrift flips.
Yeah.
And I really relate to that because as somebody who sews a lot and, I sew for myself and also for YouTube and for other things, I do feel like my closet is really full and I don't really need a lot of new stuff. I have a pretty good collection of clothing.
Right.
So that's always like a question in my mind is how you determine when you really have enough. But I still enjoy sewing. I love sewing. It's fun for me. So there's a little bit of tension there.
It is. It is. It's super conflicting as a content creator to, because if you believe that, but then your job is also to create content, then it clashes because then you got to create something new for your content every time. So I think that's why I became super conflicted probably like 2 years ago, because I just didn't want to make new things. And then that conflicted with being a creator. And then I took a pause, like, what can I do instead? What can I focus on instead? And that's where I found the joy in creating wearable cosplays. Because then for the cosplays, I could rewear it over and over again whenever I go to conventions. And sometimes for the clothes I made, it was just for the content. I never even wore it out. And then now I'm focused on, okay, I need to actually wear these beautiful designs that I came up with out. So instead of making something new, like I just went to a wedding and I rewore a dress that I made last year or 2 years ago. So I wore it to a wedding 2 years ago. And then for a wedding this year, I'm like, okay, instead of forcing myself or feeling pressure to make a new gown to wear for the sake of, content, I can, make this dress and have a video to put out. And then I can also, wear it to the wedding and film it and it'll be really cute. Instead, I am going to wear something that's just sitting in my closet, that I only wore one time. No one even really saw me in it. And it deserves some love, it deserves to be shown off. So I would really like to focus on that more, just re-wearing my creations instead of just filming it for the video and then setting it aside and never looking at it again.
Yeah. I think that's something that at least our audience likes to see too, is how do you wear it? Like, it's not just about making the thing, but also how do you wear it and rewear it and style it with different things?
Yes.
And we did one video that was about the things that have been in my closet for at least 8 years or something like that. And that was really fun to put together, to go through everything in my closet and see what are the items in my closet that I've had a really long time that I wear over and over again. It's really, it gives you kind of a different lens on the clothing you make, I think, with that kind of content. It was really fun to do. So let's go into your tips. I'd love to hear some of your tips for people who are interested in upcycling and doing their own thrift flips, because I think it's an area that could bring a lot of joy to people who sew if they're not doing it already.
Yeah, I was thinking about these the other day, and these definitely are my biggest tips for upcycling. And the first tip for me is to start with no inspiration. Because, for example, if you're going to the thrift store and you have a vision for what you want to create, 90% of the time, you're not going to be able to find what you want to upcycle, because it's random at a thrift store. But if you go there with an open mind, no inspiration, then naturally you'll just see things that look good to you. And then you'll be more inspired to turn that item into something new compared to starting with an idea already. Plus, your idea always changes along the way when doing a transformation, because you never know what the pieces are going to look like after you take it apart. It might or might not work for the design you had in your head, because once you seam rip all of your pieces and try to make something from it, it might look better a different way, and then it's going to change anyways. So let me see if that leads into a different tip. So my tip is to start with an idea, I guess, but don't be so attached to that design. Be willing to let it morph into something else along the way.
More flexible and adaptive point of view.
Yeah.
That's really helpful.
Number 2. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I was saying that's really helpful. Yeah.
The second tip I have is to obviously wash your secondhand clothes when you purchase it. if you can, if it's washable. If not, like, try to spot cleaner, sanitize it or anything, because it's secondhand. So you never know if the clothes are even washed. And if you do choose to dye it or something, a new color, then there could be things left in the fabric that need to be rinsed away first. So just how you handle it, it will really impact your process along the way. Maybe it hasn't ever been washed and it might shrink. So a lot of those things to consider.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
Number 3 is to, instead of just cutting your pieces out, I highly recommend you take the time to seam rip each piece, each seam apart so that it all lays flat. Because this will also save you fabric. Sometimes you just need like a ½ inch more of fabric, And if you're cutting at the seams, then you're getting rid of whatever the seam allowance would have added to the amount of fabric you needed. So it's all important when it comes to transforming clothes, just to be mindful of how much you really need. If you are certain that you have more than enough fabric to work with, then I'd go ahead and save some time and just cut it out and not seam rip. But if you don't have a lot to work with, then take the time to seam rip every single seam apart so that all the pieces are laying flat.
Do you have a preferred type of seam ripper that you use? I have a seam ripper right here next to me. I just use the regular, cheapo one.
I've been using the surgical seam ripper.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a razor blade. Do
you like that? I had one like that a while ago and I could not get used to it. So that's why I asked.
Okay, so it's on my table somewhere. Okay, here it is. So I have the surgical seam ripper. This one's really nice because it's very curved.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have the regular one too. And I realized that both of them come in handy depending on what I'm seam ripping. If I'm seam ripping something very sturdy or thick, like denim, then this one, the original type of seam ripper.
The one with the little red ball.
The red ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one with the red ball slides a lot faster through the seam. It's so fast. And then for this one, I find it, it could be for either or, but just certain fabrics, I prefer the one with the red ball on it, actually. So I don't have a favorite, but I do reach for this one first, the surgical seam ripper. And if it's not working out, then I will switch back to it.
I think those tend to be
one with red ball.
Those tend to be so sharp too. So that's helpful, the surgical ones.
Yes, it is very sharp until it isn't. And then it's a pain in the butt to use. You had to switch the blade.
Yeah. Yeah. Same with rotary cutters. They work so well until
yes. Yeah. No, so true.
Cool. What's your next tip?
My next tip is so this is tip number 4 now, is to always save your scraps. Don't toss in a trash or don't cut into smaller pieces and get rid of it immediately. Set it aside because you never know if you're going to need that tiny scrap to piece something together, because so often you'll accidentally cut too much off and you only have that one garment to work with. So if you made something too small, then that little scrap might be enough to piece together to make the garment looser fitting on you.
Yeah. You never know when you might need that scrap. I've become so much more religious about saving scraps than I used to.
Oh my goodness. It's a love-hate relationship because have you seen those videos where you're like, oh, you're going to throw away the scrap, but then, oh no, this might be useful one day. And then your scrap bin just piles up. And then at the end of the year, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm going to do with all this. So it's tough. That's why I always try to put out the zero waste, or try to do a video after every however many years of doing something with my scraps.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing I made was like this plushie because that's like the most useful way, fastest way to get rid of the scraps because you're stuffing all your scraps into a plushie or a beanbag or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so hard at the same time to use all of it. I wish there was like a fabric shredder that I had at home that I could just shred all of it into like stuffing size, because when you have to like cut all of it yourself into tiny pieces so that it can stuff into a plushie nicely, then it's a lot of work and it hurts your hands.
Yeah. That would be cool. That would be a really cool invention if there was some way to shred your fabric automatically.
Fabric shredder. Yeah, instead of having it sent to a factory, to do it, just like a paper shredder, but for fabric.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Yeah, I'm always looking for things to do with my scraps. And I think we did a podcast on some ideas. I love using them for stuffing, though. I think that's like the easiest and the best way to get rid of things, especially small scraps.
Yes. I agree. My fifth tip is to drape the garment on yourself first while you're thrifting. It's going to help you just visualize. It's going to help you see how the fabric flows. It's going to create the structure you're looking for. And even when you're at home and you have seam ripped all the pieces apart and then you can pick up each piece and drape it on yourself and see, what angle do you want the sleeve piece to turn at? Like if it was a bodice, does it work for that? Or maybe if you flip the sleeve upside down, what does that look like? Or the bottom of the skirt has a really cool design. Let me flip that upside down. Let me play around with the draping over my shoulders, around my neck. How does that look? So all of that helps a lot. And I spend hours doing that before I come up with a solid game plan. So like I said, this is a game plan just so that I can get started. But along the way, if the idea changes, it's going to change. But it's good to do that just to help you get a feel for how you even want to approach the transformation.
Yeah. Yeah. I do that even when I go to the fabric store. If I'm buying fabric, I find it really helpful to drape it on my body and see how it's going to look. Or if they don't have a mirror, to just like drape it on something at least so you can see how it flows. But it's even more helpful on yourself because you can see how it looks on you and kind of visualize things a little bit.
My sixth tip is to shop your own closet first before you even spend money on secondhand clothing. See what you have at home that you're not really wearing, and can you turn it into something that is currently trendy or that would just flatter your figure better? Because a lot of the times I will go thrifting and then I'll come home and be like, I already had something that I could have used.
Yeah.
And then I just spend more money on it. So it's going to save you money, and it's also it's just more sustainable to use the fabric that you already have at home, the clothes you already have, and turn it into something else.
Yeah, I love that. That's really inspiring to me. I have this dress in my closet that I bought it at a flea market type thing. And it's a silk dress. It's like this light purple silk dress, and it has little tiny white swans all over it. It's so cute. Like the fabric is so cute, but I never wear the dress. And it's just been hanging in my closet and looking for a purpose, like something I can repurpose it into. I know the idea will come to me someday, but for now it's taunting me.
Yes. That is actually a new tip I have based off of what you said, is that if you don't know what you want to make from it yet, but it has inspired you, don't give up on it yet. It might just need to sit in your closet for 2 more years. And then the idea will come later. I had this one, I don't know if it was 1 item or 2 items. No, it was 2 items. It was a dress I recently wore to the wedding this year. So it was 2 dresses that I had an idea to mash up into one. They were both gray. And I just had no ideas for it for the longest time. Literally 2 or 3 years passed by. And then I decided to do something from it. And it turned out so beautiful. One of my most favorite creations that I've done yet. And I was so quick to just donating the items back because I thrifted it. I just couldn't think of any ideas for it, but I knew I did want to do something with it, but the idea just wasn't there yet. So I gave it some time. I slept on the idea for a couple years, and then I was able to eventually come up with something that I really loved.
Well, that gives me hope. Maybe.
Yes, no.
Maybe the idea will come to me. I don't feel as bad now.
It will. All right. So my 7th tip, that was kind of like my 7th tip. My 7th tip, I guess it kind of works with it, is to like not be afraid of mistakes or messing up that item, because the mistakes are all a part. It's what upcycling is about. It's part of the process of upcycling, making those mistakes, because whenever I made a mistake, it just added to the design in the end, and it made it a lot more unique and special. And we upcycle for that purpose. You know, we don't upcycle so it can look exactly like something we could buy in the store.
Right.
It's supposed to look unique and just match your style. And I think that's the best part of upcycling. So don't be afraid to make that first cut. Don't be afraid to make a mistake, because there really is always a way to fix it in the end. Even though you have to piece something together, it's going to work out, or you're going to come up with an idea that's going to elevate your design even more.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said about making something that's really unique. Have you seen the movie Pretty in Pink from the 80s?
Yes.
I love that. I love so if anybody listening hasn't seen it, Molly Ringwald, she cuts up a dress at the end, this 1950s dress, and makes her own prom dress out of it. So there's an upcycling moment in the movie, and the dress is very, very 80s, the dress that she makes. But the whole point is that she's unique, and she's expressing herself, and she's different from everybody else around her. And that's what makes her so special. And it's an awesome movie if you haven't seen it.
So tip number 8 that I have on my list is to use a pattern. It could be a commercial pattern or a pattern that you've drafted at home to help you visualize how much fabric, how much material you have to work with. And this could be before or after you've seam ripped it and taken it apart, or if you have a big skirt, you know, you can lay out your pattern pieces all over the skirt just to get an idea of if you're even going to be able to create that design from that garment. Because sometimes we don't have enough fabric for it. Sometimes we have more than enough. So laying out your pattern pieces is very helpful to visualize that.
Do you feel like you get a sense over time of whether you're going to have enough fabric when you're thrifting? If you see a garment, like what you can get out of that garment. Do you feel like that's a skill that you learn over time as well?
Yes, definitely you will over time, especially if you have a certain style. Let's say I always make crop tops, or which I do make a lot of crop tops, or fitted bodices, corset bodices, then you'll have an idea for sure. But if you're making something new every time, I think it can be kind of hard to gauge. But if you do have a certain style that you like to stick to, you'll know for sure, you know, if something is going to give you enough fabric. And if it's not enough, you'll start to see things like, okay, the top of the pants are a little bit too small, but I can use the bottom of the legs to piece together to make the bodice bigger. So the size that you need. So you start to just be more creative with how you use all the pieces.
Yeah, definitely. It's like anything. The more you practice, the better you'll get at it.
Yeah. And it's funny because with upcycling, it's so different every time. Sometimes I feel like no matter like how many years like I've been doing it, sometimes it's still very scary to cut that fabric. There is that fear in your head still. And going through the process and finishing the garment is just a very rewarding feeling in the end. Just reassures you that, everything is going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting that you still have that nervousness even after all this time.
Mm-hmm. That's something I always want to emphasize to people too, that even experienced sewers, they are scared to make the first cut. They make mistakes. Like nothing is really perfect. We're just, diving into it and figuring it out along the way.
Yeah.
And that's how it's always been from day one for me, just figuring it out along the way. And if I make a mistake, then I can do better next time.
Right. That's an awesome perspective.
Tip number 9 is to not cut anything away. So, like when you're sewing something together and you're fitting it on yourself, to not cut any of those extra seam allowances away yet until the very end, until you're for sure certain that this is the design you want to stick to. Because the moment you cut it away, there's no going back,
Yeah.
So it is scary to make the first cut, but not so scary if you take in like the, like precautions to make sure that you can go back and undo it. So that's why I do prefer to seam rip instead of cut an item. Like I'll seam rip an entire garment because if it doesn't work out, I could just piece together the garment again. If it didn't look the way I wanted to, it can be sewn back together. But the moment you're cutting away that extra seam allowance you left for yourself, or you shortened that skirt or bodice and now it's too short, there's no going back from cutting that away. You could piece it back together, but sometimes it does ruin your design. So just wait until the very end, until you're certain that it's the look you like, and then you can cut it away.
Great tip. I think that probably is something you could apply to any sewing project, really, is to make those final decisions at the end.
Yes. Tip number 10 is this is just like a generic tip, but it's like to have fun, because like I said, the moment you stop having fun, then it's just not enjoyable. The process isn't enjoyable. So just enjoy the process and remember that you like to do it. You're doing it because you want to do it. And that the creation process is the best part, the journey of learning. And in the end, it is going to be really rewarding. So to remember to have fun, not take it too seriously, not stress out about messing up, that you can always fix it in the end or turn it into something super unique. And those are all my tips.
That in a way, that's the most important tip though of all, is just having that mindset of, this is supposed to be fun. This isn't supposed to be stressful or hard or make you feel anxious. And I think if you can keep that in mind, then you'll make better decisions and have a better time through the whole process.
Yeah. The moment I forget that like I'm supposed to be enjoying it, not, just, it can stress you out sometimes, that I'm just supposed to, the reason I'm doing this is because I like the process and sewing. When I forget that, then it no longer becomes fun for me. So I have to just, recenter myself and be like, okay, like, let's not take it too seriously. It's not going to be a big deal. If the seam doesn't match up by like 1/8 of an inch, that's okay. Yeah. I'm like so close to being done. Like it looks great on, it fits perfectly. But sometimes that seam at the zipper at the waistline is just a tad off and not meeting at the center and back. And it just makes you so mad. But I think overall, to not take those little mistakes too seriously and know that you did create something beautiful.
Yeah, I just think there's like this real human tendency to make everything stressful. You know what I mean? To like take anything fun and make it into something that, at least maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but to take anything and make it into something that has to be perfect, or it has to be a certain way, or to set all these expectations on it, or even to just look at only the mistakes and only look at things that went wrong and not look at the 100 different things that went right or that were enjoyable about it. So I think that's a really important tip, is just remembering to have a good time.
Yeah, especially for me, I used to be like the biggest perfectionist. I'm like a recovering perfectionist, you know? So something like that I just would never like let it go. I would redo it like a billion times until it looks good. And then I started realizing that other people did not do that. Like they didn't care, like, oh, it's done, you know, and they would be proud of what they made, but not me. Like, why?
Yeah, that's, I'm glad to hear that you feel like you've transformed in that way. That's really awesome.
Definitely. Cool. And, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I love your book, and I want to make sure that we tell everybody about it, because it's really fun. And if it's something that you're interested in, getting into doing this kind of upcycling stuff, I think it's going to be a real creativity booster for you. So I just want to shout out the book, because I think it's really awesome.
Yay. Thank you so much. It's definitely been a long time coming. I think we've been working on it, or it's been in the works for 2 years now, just like the decision to create the book, and then probably a year working on it and everything. The ideas, the designs, the projects I have in the book. So it ranges from like beginner to advanced. So there's even a wedding dress transformation at the end.
Yeah.
And some advanced techniques. And then there are some no-sew projects in the beginning. And I would say the hardest part about coming up with the ideas is that I did want each thrifted item to be very accessible. So it's different from shopping and doing a transformation for yourself, because you don't have to focus on that. But I wanted each piece that I thrifted to be available at other people's thrift stores as well. So I know that you could always find, let's say, like a t-shirt at a thrift store, or you can always find a maxi skirt, just simple items, a wedding dress, but the wedding dress couldn't be like two particular pillowcases, men's shirts. So those are all items that people can find at their thrift stores. And for me, how I normally approach my thrifted transformations is the opposite of that. It's normally things that other people probably won't be able to find and recreate. So the most challenging part was taking those basic garments and coming up with multiple ideas for each of them, and ideas that people could copy if they wanted to. And yeah, like we have a pullover hoodie in here and a plain black dress, and how you can embellish it to look different from the original, or to match whatever style it is or aesthetic that you have. And yeah, so I think that's just different. This book is, I feel like it's different from my own personal style. But the ideas, I wanted to be accessible enough for everyone to copy. And that was the hardest part. I have like this notebook when creating this book, and the notebook has like all of my ideas before I even decided on the final projects for the book. And there were so many ideas and variations for projects in there that didn't make it in the book. And that was the hardest part for me, to just narrow it down to 20 projects, and 20 projects that I think people could recreate at home. Because I know for my YouTube channel, the projects that I would post on there, it would just be there for inspiration, but it's not anything that someone could go to their thrift store and find and make this the same thing or something similar enough. And that's not the point of upcycling. You're not supposed to recreate what I have, but to make the most out of whatever item you found at home and just be inspired by it. So I think, and I that was just really challenging for me.
Yeah.
Because for books, you want it to be something where people could recreate it exactly almost, but it kind of goes against the idea of upcycling, which is that like, it's not supposed to be recreated in a sense.
Yeah, it's unique. But I think these projects seem like a good jumping off point so that somebody can use it to express their own personal style, or maybe even just get inspired to create something totally different, like launching off that idea. I think that's what's really cool about it.
Yeah, that's what I hope for. I don't want it to be like, oh, these are the ideas and the only ideas that you can do. I want it to be like, okay, this is something you can do, but I would do it differently. Then you take that as an inspiration and you do whatever you need to do to make it match your style.
Yeah, it's almost like permission to have fun,
Yes.
I feel like
which is something
Go ahead.
Which is something I expressed in the book, that like to approach the book is that like these are the tools and ideas I'm providing you, but ultimately you have to figure out what's your style and what's gonna flatter your body. Like these designs it's not gonna look good on everyone. It most definitely is not gonna look good on everyone, but how can you tweak it to look good on yourself?
Yeah. And I feel like this book would be particularly awesome for somebody who's like a teenager, who's in high school, who is kind of where you were or I was at the beginning of learning to sew, where we're just like want to get into that experimental phase and have fun and try things out. I feel like this could be a really good introduction to sewing for a person of that age.
I agree. I hope that's what it can be used for many years to come. It's out there now. That's how I feel about the book. Like it's out there and I just got to let it do its thing. It's going to be there if you want it, get it.
Yeah.
If you you're not going to read it all the time. It's not a book where you're going to read all the time, but when you need the help, when you need the inspiration, then it's going to be there for you to reach for and flip through.
Yeah, definitely a good one to add to your library. And it's called DIY Thrift Flip. And we'll put a link to it in the show notes as well. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, April. It was really fun.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun talking with you.
And thanks for sharing your tips. I hope you guys loved that interview with April. I think she has such a great spirit and such a great approach to sewing and to upcycling. And I personally found it very, very creatively inspiring. So I'm going to recap her 10 tips for upcycling that might be helpful to you guys. 1, start with no inspiration. 2, wash your clothes if it's secondhand. 3, seam rip to save fabric. 4, be sure to save your scraps. 5, drape the garment on yourself. 6, shop your own closet first to save money. 7, don't be afraid to make the first cut and make mistakes. 8, use patterns to lay out on the garment to figure out how much you need. 9, don't cut anything away until you're sure of your design and fit. And 10, have fun, which I think is the most important tip of all. So I hope you enjoyed this interview. I really had a lot of fun talking to April and just thinking about kind of taking a different approach to sewing and how I can maybe incorporate both upcycling, but also altering the garments that I already have to make them more wearable and to be a little bit less wasteful. I think she had some really good points about that. So if you like this episode, please consider leaving us a review. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this right now. You can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. You can follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to join Seamwork and become part of our private community, plus get access to hundreds of sewing patterns and dozens of sew-along classes, our podcast listeners get a 50% off lifetime discount when you join at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. So that's seamwork.com/go/podcast50. And don't forget to pick up April's book, DIY Thrift Flip. And that does it for us this week. I'm Sari, and this is Seamwork Radio. Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.